Gamers began to notice that popular game review websites were promoting these obscure indie games by unknown people that were just basically bad games. And they all seemed to push a political agenda as well. And with a little digging, they found out that the game developers of these games were just rich kids with no talent that had connections with these video game journalists.
And I had been sort of working on this game about trying to get all of the stuff out of my head and put it somewhere else. So that became Depression Quest.
It's not even a game. If you've ever read a Choose Your Own Adventure book, that's basically what it was. Game requires you to challenge yourself and to actually have some choice in what happens.
She had made a digital Choose Your Own Adventure book. It was all text, nothing else in it. It can't have taken very long, but it was about learning to deal with depression. And I've never had depression, so I can't judge the game on that merit. So on that, I'm sure it's very good. But your average gamer, this wasn't really a game. It wasn't a fail state. You know, there wasn't really anything you could play. It was more like an interactive novel, which is, again, it's in itself is fine. But the gaming press, because she was a prominent feminist and regressive, she got unbelievable amounts of coverage. And I mean, when I say unbelievable amounts, I mean any amount of coverage for this is more than you would expect.
And yet it received so many awards. And the interesting thing that some of the gamers picked up was the fact that the people who gave this woman an award for her game, one of them was actually having a relationship with her.
GamerGate itself started as my ex-boyfriend trying to ruin my life. I supposedly had sex with a game reviewer for free press.
The girl who started it all, Zoe Quinn. It has been confirmed that Quinn had an ongoing sexual relationship with Nathan Grayson, a writer at Kotaku and Rock Paper Shotgun. Grayson has written articles about Zoe Quinn twice. The first article is a list of 50 games added to Steam through the Steam Greenlight service. Out of that list of 50, Nathan used Quinn's game for the article image and named it as the first standout title. The second article is about an indie game reality TV show called Game Jam, and how the show was cancelled allegedly because the CEO tried to stir up drama. Regardless of who's right or wrong on that debacle, the article references Zoe Quinn directly by name multiple times, and seems to be tailored towards her side of the argument. It's also interesting to note that following the collapse of this Game Jam event, Zoe began heading a project called Rebel Jam, which she is accepting donations to her private PayPal. Huh. Weird.
And obviously gamers who care about gaming began to complain about this corruption. And suddenly all of these journalists came out and said, gamers are dead and the industry should no longer produce video games with the consumer in mind.
And then the video game press, instead of turning around and saying something like, okay, fair enough, we haven't been doing our due diligence. You know, a lot of them are professional trained journalists, like Stephen Totillo from Kotaku. He has a master's degree in journalism, and he's there saying, well, do we have to be objective? What's the need for objective journalism? And so you can instantly see the problems that were inherent in the video game industry.
There was also all these accusations of sexism and homophobia.
Like if you didn't toe a line, you were a misogynist, you were a sexist. And suddenly, like, the people that we have been reading for, like, years at this point, we're saying, like, hey, you know, you fans who've been reading us forever, you're sexist, you're misogynist, probably racist. And it was just like, what is happening? That was when I first decided, it's like, all right, I feel like saying something.
My first question is, do you play video games? I have a second question for you, though. Why do you hate women? Oh, that's probably pretty confusing for the majority of you. Why do you hate people of color? Why do you hate disabled people? Why do you hate people who have a diverse sexuality? Again, most of you are pretty confused because a large portion of you happen to be people of color. A lot of you happen to be homosexual or transgender. A lot of you happen to be disabled. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you? And that's particularly frustrating because right now there is a war going on. One that's kind of secret, not a lot of people are talking about. Because that gaming media is beginning to brand us as woman-hating, racist, homophobic, ableist, neckbeard pieces of shit.
What happened last year was a group of cultural critics from, I guess, liberal arts colleges started writing for magazines for video games. I mean, websites that.
This is something that we saw happening over the course of about 5 years, where they were just larger and larger numbers of them would be hired at various gaming publications, and then they would start writing articles like, are these video games sexist? Why are these video games misogynist? There are no trans people in these video games. This is racist. This is, you know, the standard regressive lies.
And these cultural critics started to attack the gamers and tell them that their games were sexist and that they were contributing to the rape culture. And the gamers were not like the young men at the Ivy League. The gamers fought back. This became known as GamerGate. The press has completely misunderstood it and defamed the gamers. They were just defending a hobby that they love.
And the response by the gaming media was to turn on all of you guys and tell you how awful you were.
And these cultural critics started to attack the gamers.
For 2 months now, Anita Sarkeesian's name has been splashed across the headlines as a central figure in what's been described as a war on women in the video game industry, something the media has come to refer to as GamerGate. Sarkeesian and other women who work and write about the industry say they've been threatened, intimidated, and terrified by a seemingly endless wave of anonymous threats from what they suspect are extremist members of a male-dominated gamer community.
How do you feel about video games? I still love them. I think games are really where we're going.
Video games are so interesting and engaging and interactive. I'm a gamer and I enjoy games. I love games. I'm a fan of games. I'm a gamer and I enjoy games. I love games. I'm a fan of games.
I'm going to show you a remix that I just finished this weekend and no one else has seen. One person has seen it. It's a soundtrack of one song, except I'm doing video games. So it's not exactly a fandom. I'm not a fan of video games. I actually had to learn a lot about video games in the process of making this. I don't want to go around shooting people and ripping off their heads, and it's just gross.
I'm a fan of games.
I'm not a fan of video games.
I'm a fan of games.
I'm not a fan of video games.
I'm a fan of games.
I'm not a fan of video games. I actually had to learn a lot about video games in the process of making this.
And so people were already frustrated, but the thing that really pushed it forward was the fact that all of these games media websites suddenly declared that gamers are dead and that the industry should no longer make video games with misogynistic white males in mind.
Gaming journalists responded in droves by insulting us? What? Yeah, almost every major news site was putting out articles like A Guide to Ending Gamers, The End of Gamers, Gamers Don't Have to Be Your Audience, The Death of an Identity. Ignoring the very obviously opinionated headlines, we begin to notice a prominent trend. Doesn't this onslaught of articles seem like, I don't know, a coordinated effort? I mean, if that were true, that would blatantly defy objectivity and accountability. They're spinning a story in a direction favorable to them, and not one of them is even attempting to hold journalists accountable for past actions.
What do you make of how coordinated the assault on you guys was? Like that, the fact that basically a good portion, if not all of the mainstream gaming press, they all started coming out with the same articles about how evil all the gamers were.
The Gamers Are Dead articles is what those are called, if anybody wants to look those up.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all came out in the same span of 24 hours, and it was just like, what is going on? It still blows my mind that it happened. But yeah, it was pretty coordinated, and it's a constant thing. It was going on in the mainstream media. It blew up. And I think a large reason as to why the term social justice warrior and why that kind of person is now outed and why people know that that kind of person exists is because of that controversy. I don't think the term or the idea of that person would have been normalized as much without Gamergate.
And what these articles were actually originated from was a Professor Adrian Shaw, who is a professor of communications at Temple University, who first wrote the article that the gaming identity should be destroyed. And she's also featured in these diagram minutes that I'm going to go back to in a minute. But she said basically that in these diagram minutes, why do we see such tension between academics and game designers? How can we better intervene in industrial logic to disturb that process? How can academics bridge the gap to industry audience to help them do different work? How can we disrupt the capitalist norms to facilitate this? Basically, what that's saying is, how can we manipulate the game industry to produce games that academics like myself deem worthy? And she's not only a professor of communications, and she's part of a US government IARPA program called Sirius. Sirius, if you go on Sirius's website, which this Adrian show is connected to, the About section says, Sirius is a program to use video games to train analysts to recognize their cognitive biases, which basically means to brainwash them or to re-educate them.
Well, hold on to your butts, because guess what? It likely was a coordinated effort. Yeah, just the other day it was revealed that journalists and editors from a plethora of different tech and gaming sites communicate privately in a Google group called Game Journo Pros.
A man named William Usher leaked out a secret mailing list, as you said, called Game Journal Pro. And it was basically just an email list of games journalists who were promoting this, social Marxist, cultural Marxist agenda, and were trying to shut down any dissidents amongst other journalists. Also amongst them were people in the games industry, game developers, and PR representatives. So that was one of the email leaks that showed corruption. There have been other ones that are related to the bigger establishment media names. One of them was from The Guardian, in fact, where the Guardian editor instructed the journalists not to report about GamerGate unless they first talk to one of the journalists and get instructed about what it's about. So this corruption and nepotism amongst the media is quite extensive, and thankfully the GamerGate is exposing it.
With this information comes a leaked email thread talking specifically about the Zoe Quinn debacle, discussing how best to help her. I've been able to confirm writers from Wired, Eurogamer, GameSpot, Joystick, Kotaku, TechRadar, Ars Technica, Game Informer, and Polygon as members of the mailing list. This is a big deal. Over 14 different news sites posted articles favorable towards Zoe Quinn's pro-feminist, professional victimhood ideology.
The regressives turned up and started being corrupt in a whole different way. Instead of being motivated by money, which I suppose is to their credit, they were motivated by ideology, and so now they would hire people into positions and promote things that were all based on cronyism. It was all their friends and family members and whatnot. They would push everything to do with their agenda, and people had just been really, really sick of it, and they were tired of this faux moralism.
So why are these journalists using sexism and misogyny as talking points to divert the issue? Why, because Zoe Quinn is a woman, of course, and we all know that when a woman receives negative criticism or negative comments, that she's being oppressed, she's being harassed, because she's a woman? Many articles are claiming that Anita Sarkeesian was run out of her own home as a result of a threat, likely and specifically in most articles, made by a gamer. They're saying that Anita and now Quinn are being attacked based solely on their gender, not because of their dishonest and corrupt behavior.
Now, I deplore the fact that some feminist critics and game developers have been threatened. And in the earlier video, I pointed out that gamers were being blamed for issuing death threats, even though no one knows who sent them. Well, since that video, I've learned that several people inside GamerGate, including 2 women, have received death threats too.
But these players also have a home base from which they plan their raids and coordinate their attacks. These are largely anonymous and unmoderated internet forums and message boards, like certain parts of Reddit and certain parts of 4chan. Usually when we think of online harassment, we think of teenage boys in their parents' basements, but that's just not the reality of the situation. While there were undoubtedly some boys involved, I was also attacked by thousands of grown men. And this isn't totally surprising considering the fact that the average age of gamers in the US is approximately 30. They're largely anonymous and unmoderated internet forums and message boards, like certain parts of Reddit and certain parts of 4chan. These are spaces with no real mechanisms for accountability.
After college, I was in a lot of student loan debt. You know, I came from a family that doesn't have any money whatsoever, and I had to just pay it back. So the smartest move for me was to go into finance. I hit the ground running in New York City, worked at a private equity firm for 4 years, left that firm and wanted to do my own anti-bullying startup thing.
My team and I came together because we all grew up during this generation of the huge technology boom, and we understand the harm that social media like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter has allowed for, which is essentially a dehumanization. How can we bring it back to the if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all, or the old school say it to my face mentality online? Our answer was simple: through accountability.
So I don't know if many people that watch this show are familiar with the GamerGate scandal. I certainly wasn't. That whole scandal is built on a girl named Zoe Quinn who says that she was attacked by anonymous white men on the internet. And people were saying that that wasn't true, and she said that it was. And
if they were anonymous, how did she know their skin color?
I don't know. If you read the pieces in the media, it's fascinating, you know?
Yeah.
So I was doing an anti-bullying startup that I was really passionate about, and I got a phone call from her, and I put up basically a 3-minute video on Kickstarter teasing what we were going to do. And I said this one sentence, which was a figure of speech that I think set the alarms off. I said, what we're doing is figuratively lifting the masks up off of trolls. At the time, she was working at Twitter. She was working for Twitter for something called Crash Override Network, and I immediately received an inbox from her on Twitter saying she'd like to talk to me about and try to convince me that the project that I'm doing is bad, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So she calls me up, and I have no idea who she is. I don't know what GamerGate is. I don't know what doxing means. And she says, you have to pull your project because people actually don't want to find out who harassed them. She said, I'm a victim, but I never want to know who harassed me on the internet. Like, she was basically arguing a point that didn't make sense. If she was actually harassed on the internet, then obviously my technology would be a godsend, because they never figured out who harassed her. And I said, you know, I appreciate the phone call. This isn't really making sense to me.
Yeah.
You know?
It sounds literally the reverse of what you'd think she would have called you to say.
Absolutely. Okay. Like, she should have been on board with what I was doing. I totally appreciate the phone call, but I'm not going to pull my Kickstarter. And she started crying. And she said, if you don't, it's going to ruin everything.
It's so interesting that she used the word everything. You're going to ruin everything. That's a really fascinating little play.
Terrifying.
And you know how sometimes one word can actually change everything?
Yep.
Can change everything.
Yeah.
One word, but you're going to ruin everything. Like, you would think that in her line of work and with all these people, they're always complaining about these trolls.
Yep.
You would have been handing them the golden ticket.
Right. And I am convinced it's because they are running essentially an anti-marketing firm. right? So they get people to go online and they can build people up or take them down, or they can get people fired up by pretending that they're white men. And she told me that she spends time on 4chan because of what she does, and she saw that people were already talking about my project, and if I didn't pull it, these anonymous white men and Trump supporters, you have to remember this was during the election cycle, were going to come after me and dox my family, which essentially means put up their personal information so people can try to kill them. That's what she says.
So she said this is what they are going to do. So she was oddly threatening you with being doxxed, but it wasn't she that was going to dox you.
She thought I was a total moron, I think, you know, and I'm like, okay, I'm not pulling my project. She hangs up the phone crying. Within 2 hours, we were absolutely inundated. About 4,000 emails via Kickstarter, like, you know, nigger, 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 die, 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 you know, pull your project. And they have these super obvious screen names like, you know, Trump or die, you know, Trump 2020, white man behind computer.
That's a good one. That guy's always kidding me.
So, and I'm like, is she kidding? All men, by the way. Everyone was like, you know, Dave at, you know, Bob at no woman. And magically, everything that she tried to warn me about came true within a couple of hours of me refusing to pull my project.
So she reached out under a guise of the same concerns and asked for my email address, or asked for an email address that was working rather. And I told my employee to just give her my actual email address. I didn't see any harm in doing that. Now I'm getting all of these emails within 45 minutes of sending out this email to her, and it's rapid. We can no longer respond to legitimate questions on our Kickstarter campaign because we're being inundated on Kickstarter, on my personal email, and our, you know, contact emails throughout, you know, Degree 180, right? Like, I mean, we're just being inundated with threats, and every web address has gamer something in it, okay? At the same time, our Twitter feed starts heating up, okay? And it's doxing minors, this and that. These people want to create a database that's going to dox minors, yada, yada, yada.
So I tweet very quickly, again, not really knowing the bread and butter of the GamerGate scandal. I said, all I can say is that 100% after speaking with Zoe Quinn, this girl was never harassed. She's doing the harassing. And the next morning I woke up, The Guardian, The Washington Post, and New York Magazine were all calling me. I was a nobody with a Kickstarter that was 3 minutes long. Kickstarter pulled my project, and the next day, big media. And in my head, I'm thinking, you know, journalism major, Washington Post, amazing, like, you know. So I was like, great, I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to tell them about this girl. They're going to write the piece, you know.
I have a bad feeling where this is about to go.
So I speak to a person named Jesse Single, who works for New York Magazine, and he's like, yeah, I saw your tweets.
He's not a fan of mine.
No, well, he is a journalist, and he speaks to me. He's like, yeah, I saw your tweets. I just wanted to speak to you about what happened, you know, super nice. Yeah, and I tell him everything. He instead writes this article, and the tone of it was essentially trying to gaslight me. Oh, you know, she seemed like a nice girl, but she got dragged into this conspiracy theory. Zoe actually is a girl that was harassed, you know. And at that point, I realized, oh my God, like, the media is going to try to kill my project, and these journalists are absolutely lying. So the Washington Post called me, and I had the good sense to actually record it. I just turned on my camera and said, something fishy's here. And this girl was obvious. This girl, Caitlin Dewey, was asking me questions, and she was trying to figure out who was funding us. And her job, or her role, was to cut off the funding, cut off the legs of Social Autopsy so it could never see the light of day. And she started calling around, so I actually got a tip that she had already written the article and she was going to try to smear me. And I essentially went back and forth with the Washington Post. I had caught her in a lie via email versus what she said on the phone, and they pulled the article last second and told me I wasn't important enough to run it anyways when I threatened to sue them.
Wow.
Yeah.
He enjoys twice the number of YouTube subscribers as One Direction, but he's far from a household name. He's the new breed of celebrity bringing social media success into mainstream stardom.
They call him PewDiePie.
Yes. Hey man, you want to go on a date?
Famous for recording himself playing video games. The 26-year-old online gamer currently has the most popular channel on YouTube with over 40 million subscribers. His videos now seen over 10 billion times.
There was PewDiePie.
Yeah,
Felix.
let's talk about that because
I saw his response video, and I kind of got sickened by what's happening to him.
It was crazy.
The whole thing's insane. They're making it out like he's a Nazi.
Right.
And he's not at all.
He went through the site. It all started from this one video that got him attention. He went to Fiverr and tried to get people to do ridiculous, outrageous things.
Okay.
Right? Get a guy dressed as Jesus to say something weird. He got these. The main thing that blew up were these two guys. They're in like a jungle setting of some sort. They dance, they laugh, they'll hold up a sign, they'll say something. And so he was like, it's going to be hilarious because they're not going to do it, right? They're going to be like, thank you, but no. But they actually made a video where the guys were laughing and dancing, held up a sign that said, death to all Jews, and then said to subscribe to a YouTube channel.
And they're laughing.
Yeah, and so I think this might be from his explanation video, but in the first one, he's like, why the fuck did they do it? Can I even include this?
I mean, there was a Wall Street Journal article on it, right? Which was where it got really weird because 3 people worked on this and they combed through
hundreds of hours.
Yeah, I mean, and they found like instances of him holding his arm out like this, and they used that picture. Like, I mean, that's weird.
It's very weird. And then once all of it came out that they were like, well, here's the thing about the context. He's just like Donald Trump, and it was an immediate jump to he's using the same tactics as Donald Trump, but it was just insane.
No, he's very reasonable. He did a response video about it, and the way he handled it was very reasonable.
Yeah.
And he explained what he was doing, what's going on, and he's doing hundreds of hours of him playing video games and talking and being silly. And if you comb through those and take these things, again, out of context and try to make it look like he's a Nazi, that's a hit piece.
100%.
And didn't he lose some gigs?
That doesn't matter for him, though. I said it. He said it. He understands why they would have to separate, because then it becomes a story of YouTube and Disney support an anti-Semite, right?
But obviously he's not an anti-Semite,
right.
So why would they back away?
I think because they were scared that the Wall Street Journal was like, did you see all of this? We're going to write this article.
How did the Wall Street Journal let that slip through? That seems to me very irresponsible.
Many of them are standing by it, though. Many people, yes, 100%. And many are touting it as this victory.
Yeah, well, it just shows you the level of control they have, that they can even inject these propaganda into sitcoms and television shows. As I said, they have control of those already. So the SVU episode was basically a hit piece and made it seem like the only reason that gamers are upset is because they're, heterosexual white males that are completely misogynistic and just don't want women in gaming. That they are also rapists and, women beating terrorists and it's comical. Even the people who are against GamerGate thought it was an embarrassing episode.
Like overgrown boys, staring at a screen, pressing buttons. Isn't there a basketball game on or something?
Go home, gamer girl. Go home, gamer girl.
What happened?
These guys, they just can't stand women in gaming.
But Sarah told me that the guys who did this don't like women in gaming.
Well, in their world, a developer's like God, and some guys aren't ready to give a girl that power.
Women in gaming. What did I expect?
That slut Reyna deserves all the pain that's coming to her. Her game is derivative, mind-numbing garbage. She's a whore.
There's a lot of haters out there that think she slept her way into the business. I know. I read on Kotaku that it's better than Civ 5 with the Brave New World expansion pack.
What did they do to you?
They leveled up. They were young, they were white but pale, kind of skinny.
That's 80% of the crowd.
And I'd like to also touch on the fact that, as you said, the bias in the media is just so blatant that when so many people wrote to the Australian ABC against their article about GamerGate, the ABC was forced to reply. And what they wrote in their reply was that they chose to cover only the harassment angle and not detail anything about the corruption in the media industry. They openly admitted it.
With the help of some amazing mentors and by reading a lot of feminist writing, especially the words of women of color and queer women from around the world, I learned to see through a sociological lens and understand the world as it really exists, as a series of intersecting social systems. Once you have a systemic and institutional framework, you see how oppression manifests in many subtle ways under the systems of what Bell Hooks calls white supremacist capitalist patriarchy.
You had to learn about the sociology of systems and structural change. Absolutely. And that was obviously quite a journey for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of joke about how it was the most liberating thing that ever happened to me and also the most frustrating for everyone around me. Because like when you start learning about systems, everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out to everyone all the time.
I do play some games here and there. But like, you know, I played Grand Theft Auto, and yeah, you could steal a car and punch a hooker, and people would say, well, that's against women, but you could also punch a man. So should they only have it that you'd only punch men? I mean, even the logic behind it doesn't really stand to critique.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
And there's no winning either. This is the point. It's all what's called a Kafka trap. It's either you are this thing or you're this thing, you don't even realize it. You know, and there's no falsifiability to any of their hypotheses. But the main problem, I mean, if you think about it like with Grand Theft Auto, so like, what are the options? Not include women in the game. No way. They'd freak out if you couldn't put women in the game.
Right.
Or you can have the women not being able to be treated like men. Again, they'd be freaking out. That's not equal at all. So, what are you going to have? You're going to have women so that they just can't be damaged? Or, you know, they will not allow you to treat women like men. You know, you can't beat up women, but you can beat up men. And so you're in this position where you've got no win. You know, there's no good answer. And that's how they want it.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out to everyone all the time. Once you have a systemic and institutional framework, you see how oppression manifests in many subtle ways under the systems of what Bell Hooks calls white supremacist capitalist patriarchy.
GamerGate is a Twitter hashtag, and it attracts gamers from all over the world, males and females, liberals, conservatives, black, white, straight, gay, trans. Some gamers identify with the hashtag because they believe there's too much corruption in gaming. Others are weary of cultural critics who evaluate video games through the prism of gender politics. Now, I discovered GamerGate when I was working on my recent video about sexism in games. Now, in that video, I pointed out that the evidence does not support the claim that video games cause violence or misogyny. I mean, gaming has surged since the early 1990s, but youth crime has plummeted. And millennials who were born and raised in video game nation, they are far less sexist, homophobic, bigoted than older generations.
GamerGate, because the correct response to being accused of corruption is strawmanning your opponent and insulting them.
Hello, I'm a minority and I support GamerGate and I'm not your shield, SJW.
My name is Bernard Williams and I support GamerGate because of the reason that I am a gamer myself and I am also black.
My name's Cameron, Rude Brown Dude on Twitter. I just want to say that I'm against corruption in game journalism, I'm against harassment, I'm for equality, I'm for GamerGate, and I'm not your shield.
And as a black gamer and the person who started Not Your Shield, I don't want my identity to be used as some kind of marketing push or some kind of instant get out of jail free card for SJWs to use against me. So, my name is Nino, and I am not your shield.
GamerGate is a consumer boycott and a call for ethics reform in game industry media. Evidence comes up that a writer at Kotaku gave a game favorable coverage because of a relationship he had. Kotaku says that this isn't true. More evidence comes up proving otherwise, and people demand he gets fired. Adam Baldwin shows support by creating the Twitter hashtag GamerGate. In response, Kotaku and many other sites published 14 different articles, all saying the same thing: gamers are dead, all in the same day. Readers declare a boycott on these sites and begin contacting their advertisers. To fight the stereotype, the hashtag NotYourShield is made because minorities like myself hate having game journalists pretend to speak for us, especially especially since some of them are racist. Reddit's r/gaming starts censoring all forms of Gamergate discussion. Even 4chan censors Gamergate. This leads to a mass migration to a much better website. Feminist scholar Christina Sommers releases a video debunking the idea that video games make people sexist. Game sites call her a conservative. She's a Democrat. Milo Yiannopoulos leaks emails from a private Google group called Game Journals Pro, proving that game journalists collude to shape narratives. Corruption is also exposed in award shows like IGF. Not wanting to associate with such hacks, one by one advertisers start to pull out, with the latest one being... Oh, and one last thing. If you hear anyone say Gamergate is about harassment or misogyny, laugh in their stupid face and remind them that we donated more than $70,000 to help women make video games, and no game site would talk about it.